So we went through the quick start tutorial and you got to see how the whole moto process works on a very basic scene, but still something that can look very cool. Well, now what I'm going to do is take a step back and go through some of the basics. In our previous videos, we used to create help videos. I'm going to bypass those. And as I mentioned earlier, this course is really going to be more about introducing all the tools throughout. It'll get a little more advanced as we go on, a little less project modeling and surfacing and rendering, which can get kind of tedious because there's a lot of stuff out there, and more about really understanding the tools. That being said, let's take a look at the Moto 901 interface. Now, we went through some of the basics and we talked about the primitive tools here and how to use them. We talked about selections and objects that are made up of vertices, which have edges in between them, which create the polygons to make an item. And that's how we're going to use our selection tools. But there's a number of other things up here that you might be wondering what they are. First, let's start at the top. New for 901 is this new interface that allows us to switch between varied interfaces. So while we have one big interface, this is the model interface. We could jump to a topology interface, meaning we can basically build over other polygons. And the reason topology is good is because sometimes you have scanned data that comes from other sources that is really, really heavy geometry. It's hard to work with. And you can't use normal subdivisions and Moto's wonderful polygon tools and editing tools on those models. You can bring them in and then using topology, build over them with a much simpler mesh, but at the same time, getting more detail. UV. All right, we're going to talk about this. UV tools have been greatly improved in Moto 901, and we're going to go through some UVs a little bit later on in that section. From there, the Paint tab. And in the Paint tab, we have Sculpt tools, Paint tools, Hair tools, Vertex Map tools, Particle tools, and some utilities. So a lot of really cool effects right in this panel. The layout. I use this a lot because layout, what you can do really for this is set up some animations. In here we've got clone, scatter clone, a few other things, but down here I can actually set up some environments. Look at some default meshes that come with Moto. We'll take a look at those in a little bit. Other different items, we're going to load different assemblies for some presets, different profiles for beveling and extrusions. And then there's audio, if we had any loaded, that we can use for different types of things like driving a bumping speaker or things like that. And I believe we did that in one of our previous courses as well. You can also drag and drop materials right in this view. And then there's setup. Well, how is setup different from layout? Well, setup is where we're going to find our dynamic tools, our inverse kinematic tools, and so on. We're also going to build joints in here for deformations, things like that. Then we get to animate. And give this a second. The animate tab, actually it's one I use really quite often, allows us to see our big long timeline. I can pop my graph editor open. I can also close these out, these two little buttons right here, and just have a much simpler interface for when I'm working with different animation tools. So I like to set a perspective view here and a camera view here so I can actually see my animation. The render tab, which we used a lot in the previous videos, allows us to see a full real-time render in this view, and we're going to talk about some of these tools as we use them. Of course, we've got a perspective view or any other type of view we want. We have our item list, our shader tree, and then, of course, all the properties. There's a lot of properties for many of these things, such as materials, so having this view set up where this column is tall and takes up our full screen is really pretty good. In the scripting tab, you can use this to build any kind of custom script you want. It's been greatly enhanced with 901. You can do custom interfaces. It's built on the Qt framework, and you can really do get some serious damage here if you're a good programmer. So something to look at if you are that type of person. Finally, we've got the schematic fusion. Mesh Fusion, which used to be a third-party plugin for Moto, is now included with 901, and we're going to do a cool tutorial on that a little bit later. The schematic fusion view allows us to see what we're building here, but then it has a nice big open area for putting a schematic tree together to see the full hierarchy of our structure. All right, so just a quick overview on those tabs and what they are. Now, one thing it's important to understand is that all of these are really just presets. And if you come up to layout, you can actually see here we have favorites, different layouts, a switcher bar, which is what that's called right at the top, and we can turn that on and off. We can actually move it to the bottom of the screen if you want. You can take that and make it on the left side of the screen. A lot of people aren't aware you can do that. And, it just really depends on how you like to work. You can close it, pop it open. I keep it at the top. I'm going to keep everything default just so you kind of get the idea where you want it. You can show collapse bar, turn it off. Switcher bar. Let's put it right back on the top. There we go. You can also create favorites or only show favorites. So let's say I have paint as a favorite. I can show only that. Not a big deal. It is, though, if you start building your own. And you can do that with the plus right here. You can hit plus, create yourself a custom layout. And let's just say a copy of the current layout, just to give you an idea. So now I've got a copy of the model tab, but then maybe in the model tab I don't want any properties. So with my mouse up in the top corner, I can right click and I can right click on there and get a duplicate. I can also right click and delete. Right click and delete if I want. Move this around. I can actually grab this, pull it off altogether, and just move it somewhere else, and then delete that one. So I can create my own custom tab, which is really nice, and say, oh, well, that's my favorite now, and then only show that favorite, and that's it. And then I can auto hide this by hitting that little guy right there. So just even better, simpler ways to work. Now let's say you do all that and you don't like it. Well, there's my Dan. I can go back to animate if I want, or I can go back to file, hit reset, don't save. Another thing about the interface is that if you move your mouse over any of these little edges of the panels, you can see that the cursor changes, and once it does, you can click and drag. So when you see a little arrow like this one, that means there's actually more tools there that just got kind of hidden because of the panel or the size of your screen. So be aware of that. You can also move this way, and if you have dual monitors, you can actually grab these panels and pull them off. Earlier I showed you how this expands the view, makes a quad zoom. You actually have these on these small panels as well. So that's about it, just as an overview. Let's go on to the next video and talk a little more intricately about action center, symmetry, fall off, snapping, and so on.